Okay, thank you. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much for being here this morning. Hey, the People First Task Force was stood up as an output of the 70 recommendations made by the Fort Hood IRC. So we're nearly complete with all of those recommendations. And our current focus is on how do we just address the context within which those recommendations were made overall. We're going to talk about that this morning here, but I do just want to start with some societal context and then talk about some of the initiatives that we've got going on here on the People First Task Force. So in society, 10 years ago, Tinder did not exist, right? It did not form as a public company until 2013. It became popular in 2014, and today it's the defining characteristic of how our youth engage with each other with that very important, deep, substantive kind of relationship interaction, often distilled to a set of ones and zeros on a flat computer screen, right? 5 years ago, COVID did not exist. Today, they both exist together. Also today, 28% of all youth in America indicate that they've experienced some form of sexual trauma before the age of 18. And last year, the National Pediatric Association declared the mental health of our youth as a national public health emergency. Those four things exist simultaneously today. And the thinking is, as we look forward, that these things may get worse kind of moving forward, right? As we further understand the impacts of social media on the mental health of our youth and what that means to how they interact and grow and kind of find meaning in their lives, as we further understand the impacts of the pandemic and some of the impacts associated with isolation during key developmental timelines in our youth's lives here as well, presence and prevalence of sexual trauma, and then also the mental health crisis that the National Pediatric Association continues to track there as well. We also have economic uncertainty and then other things going on in our society. So the goal here is to put in place a system that is kind of the equivalent of an iPhone 13 for today, but knowing that within a few years we're going to need an iPhone 18 and iPhone 20 as we further respond and evolve with kind of what we're seeing not only within the Army, but around society as well. Against that backdrop, 3 years ago, the Chief of Staff of the Army said, people first. Number one priority, we're going to put our people first, right? And then last year, the Secretary of the Army, 2 of her 6 priorities are directly related to ensuring care for our people, promoting healthy climates, and then reducing harmful behaviors overall. To me, that's absolutely incredible. And I'm so proud to be a part of this Army that's committed to that, to ensuring care for our people. And there's been a lot of tremendous work across the Army in response to that. Every division and corps in the Army today has some form of a People First campaign plan there. And the whole Army has rallied around those priorities. And what I'd like to do, if you could go to the first slide, I've got, this right here, is talk about this. So when General McConville talks about people first, he talks about cohesive teams that are highly trained, disciplined, and fit. And that's a representation of a soldier that's connected to family, unit, and then their friends there. That is foundational. It is essential. It's who we are as an Army. And really, fundamentally, this is what people first means. And I'd like to talk about that for just a second. My own thinking, when you think about the TV series Band of Brothers, my thought is that is not a war movie. That's a love story. We just haven't figured it out yet, right? I mean, those soldiers loved each other. They endured great privation because they trusted each other. They accomplished great things on behalf of our nation because they were a cohesive team, right? If you read every story of valor in our Army, there's some component of, I didn't want to let my friends down. I wasn't going to let somebody hurt you, right? Because we're on the same team and we love and we trust each other. We're fundamentally a cohesive team. If you think about how we train in the Army, training is an imaginative construct in which we visualize what we think future conflict might be like. And even if we got that exactly right, at the edge of the network, those teams that fight and win our nation's wars, they might experience a combination that looks a little different than what we had imagined. We might imagine as an example, aviation, artillery, direct fire contact. They might experience communications jamming and then some kind of a dismounted threat. And as we've done for millennia, armies, we rely on those cohesive teams to innovate, to adapt, to fight, and then win. And they do that Because they're cohesive, because they're connected here, right? So fundamentally, this is not something that's an additional duty somewhere. It's not something that's kind of a squishy other. Fundamentally, this is about who we are as an army, our commitment to each other, our connections with each other, that foundational cohesion and trust on which armies and people thrive and fight and win. So fundamentally, that's what People First means. This happens thousands of times across our army every day, right? New soldier arrives to a unit, first sergeant says, "Welcome to Alpha Company. This is by far the greatest company in the entire world, like the universe, right? You are so lucky to be here. We're proud to have you. You're going to go work for Sergeant Smith down in 1st Squad in Alpha Company, and she's going to take good care of you, right? She's going to make sure nothing happens to you, and if something does, we're all going to be there for you," right? That is exactly what People First means, right? Welcome to Alpha Company, the greatest team in the world. We are a cohesive team. We are highly trained, disciplined, and fit, right? Sergeant Smith's going to take good care of you down there. She's going to prevent harmful behaviors. And if something happens, we're all going to be there for you. We're going to intervene and respond on behalf of you. So it's a really powerful thing, and the underpinning of it is that people are readiness. Fundamentally, this is who we are as an army. It's what allows us to fight, thrive, and win our nation's wars. And I'm really proud to be a part of it. There's a lot of stuff that we're working on. We have the team here to talk about it this morning. We are going to talk some about upstream prevention. That's aligned with the DoD guidance. They have a prevention plan of action down there. Or up there, I'm sorry. It's aligned and nested as part of that. There's an Army campaign plan. 2 of the 6 objectives, campaign objectives in the Army campaign plan are directly related to this space. Promote healthy climates and then reduce harmful behaviors. So operationalizing our people is really a big focus area as well, to include an associated implementation plan. We have a cohesion assessment team that embeds with a unit. They collect data specifically focused on cohesion. They work for the commander and the command sergeant major, and it culminates with a unit-led after-action review, much like you find at our combat training centers, focused specifically on cohesion. We have a fusion directorate that's intended to improve victim services on our installations. It does 3 things. First, it puts somebody in charge of victim services on the installation. It co-locates all of those services so you don't have to kind of search around for those. And then finally, it puts in place some good enabling systems and processes there as well. We have General Brito, Miss Busico, and Lieutenant General Stitt, our G1, just signed and published the Army People's Strategy and an associated implementation plan directly aimed at all of the tasks and efforts and initiatives in this space. We're also conducting a program review. Miss Major is going to talk about a holistic, integrated prevention strategy, and we've only got 40 minutes. I could talk for hours about everything that's going on in this space. We are so proud to have you. We will all be here as long as you'd like us to afterwards to talk, to discuss, or to connect for additional discussion and then collaboration. So I can't thank you enough for being here. I'm so proud to have you here. I can't thank everybody enough for your leadership and your investment in all of this. And very, very proudly, I'm excited to introduce Command Sergeant Major Martinez.
Well, thank you very much, sir, and ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I want to thank you for spending some time with us, because I would tell you what, we are extremely excited about being here with you today, and you may ask why. The team has spent a significant amount of time really thinking about prevention, and now we see ourselves, as we hear Army senior leaders view themselves through a lens of prevention. I've got some peers in the crowd that I speak to on a regular basis, and their conversations with their commanders are all about prevention. So this morning we ask that you pay attention, listen along, and because we really want to hear your thoughts on this particular subject and be able to answer your questions. And with that, I just want to go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Angela Major.
Okay, good morning. So can we get the next slide, please? So some of you might be asking yourselves, what is prevention and why does it feel like such an insurmountable task? And I'll get to that, but first I think that we should acknowledge that prevention does feel really hard, right? As an Army, many of our programs of record are really built around how we intervene and how we respond. And prevention over the years has really been that 1 hour annual training event that we took, or the awareness campaign that we went to. If you're like me and perhaps grew up in the 80s watching Saturday morning cartoons, you might be familiar with the phrase, the more you know, or if you watched G.I. Joe, the phrase, knowing is half the battle, right? So we were raised believing that awareness equaled prevention, and yet we know from cognitive science that awareness alone is not enough to change behaviors. In order to change behaviors, in order to reduce or prevent harmful behaviors, we really need to get upstream. When we're focused on intervention and response, so if we think of prevention as an operational environment with upstream prevention, intervention, and response, when we're in intervention and response, the harmful behaviors are already present, right? There's the environment permits those harmful behaviors to exist. When we're in upstream prevention, really there is no space for that operating environment, right? So we want to break parity from, if we thought of the harmful behavior in the sense of the enemy, we want to break parity and get into upstream prevention where we have the ability to have some overmatch. And yet, intervention and response often seems like it's the easiest part. When you look at our programs of record, we have really great checklists that tell us how we have to intervene or how we should respond when an event has occurred, right? We don't have that same checklist for prevention. And if you'll look, as an example, when we're in upstream prevention, we're not even talking about a harmful behavior. What we're talking about the conditions that are the risk factors or the protective factors that prevent those harmful behaviors from occurring. We're really talking those conditions that don't allow a harmful behavior to manifest in the operational environment. So if I could maybe have just advance one on the slide. So when we're in response, we're often focused just on an individual, maybe one or two individuals, and we're expending a lot of resources, right, to one person. And when you think about this in terms of maneuver space or decision space, we really don't have a lot of room. As a commander, you don't have a lot of room to respond. If you advance to the next slide. When we're in intervention and response, we're again dedicating quite a few resources to now a smaller group of individuals. And this is still prevention, right? But it's really, we're dealing with high-risk individuals when our goal is really to keep our soldiers from becoming at risk or becoming high risk. And so in intervention, we're doing some medical treatment. We're still sort of focused on the individual. We're maybe sending someone to financial readiness training because they've had some concerns. But again, we're dedicating a lot of resources to sort of a smaller group of individuals. Now, when we go to upstream prevention, and we focus on things like quality of life, we focus on things like peer-to-peer mentoring, our MWR programs, we focus on things like social connectedness, mentorship, our reception companies, spouse employment. We start to see that we have a lot more of an opportunity to do a lot of things for prevention. If we can just advance one more slide. And we're really able to have a significant impact across our entire formation or our installation. And so when we take a public health approach to prevention, we're really focusing now, we're not focusing as much on the individual, and we're starting now to focus more on the community. And if you could see the words or listen to the words that I talked about, none of that was prevention, right? I didn't use the word prevention anywhere and talking about the opportunities that we have to prevent harmful behaviors, because we're really focused and looking at those things that can have a very broad impact on building a better quality of life for our soldiers, for our families, really addressing the conditions and the environment in which our soldiers live, work, and play, and really then preventing these soldiers from even becoming at risk. And so now I'd like to turn it over to Mr. John Hunter to talk about what prevention could look like at the installation level.
Next slide, please. So one way of looking at this, and right up front I'll say this was taken from a 4ID model and we've adapted it slightly, but how would this play out at the installation level? So as General Norrie says, it's not just prevention. First and foremost, the ability to train. The ability to train combat soldiers to be able to fight and win. Fitness, holistic fitness, the H2F program, but also other healthy outlets for soldiers. The mindset. Or I'll go to cohesive teams first. So cohesive teams that we talked about, we're all very familiar with these concepts. But now we want to add a couple more to really implement a prevention approach. Mindset, whether you call this the spiritual readiness side, mindfulness, but it's really that preparing soldiers and families to make strong, good, emotional, healthy decisions. Decisions to do the right thing. And then community. Probably the most important is enhancing that sense of community. And this is where we bring all those capabilities together. It's quality of life and all that contains. It may be certain facilities. It may be the quality of barracks. It's the services that support that connectiveness within the installation. And if you picture that occurring, not just isolated to the installation, because 65% of our married soldiers live off the installation. So it's that larger sense of community and employing this type concept in the larger community. In the Compo 2 and 3, the challenges are a little more complex because they're not installation-based for the most part, but the same conditions apply and the same principles apply. What Angela talked about is really increasing protective factors and decreasing risk factors. So consider this just like any other military operation. We know the risk. We know the causes of the various things that contribute to suicides, contribute to domestic violence. But getting after those causes early while they're in the nascent stages, before they can aggregate, before they grow and manifest into a harmful behavior. We can do that by decreasing those factors, attacking them directly, or we can do it by increasing, we can do it by increasing protective factors. And that's really bringing those capabilities. Crime, we reduce crime by having an effective crime prevention program. All of this working in concert under the direction of a senior commander at the installation level or commanders at the ACOM and ASCC levels. Secretary of the Army said it best. We have to find a way to stop responding to harmful behaviors after they occur and find ways to prevent harmful behaviors. Our goal throughout what we've described and what we're building into the prevention strategy is be able to provide safe, healthy, supportive environments where our soldiers and their families and our DA civilians can work, can play, but can also thrive. And with that, they'll be supported by caring leadership, the cohesive teams they're a part of, and the services necessary to take care of them and their families. So this time, we'll open it up to questions. And General Norrie?
Yep, that sounds great. That sounds great. Thank you. I really appreciate it. So we structured, that's about 20 minutes worth of comments, and we're available to answer any questions that you might have. I do just want to highlight, we have two incredible heroes here today in the space. Ms. Dee Geis, the leader of the Army's Quality of Life Task Force, is here today. Dee, thank you very, very much. And we also have Ms. Renee Johnson, who works in the Army Resilience Directorate, and she leads the Integrated Prevention Action Group there within the Army Resilience Directorate as well. So thank you for being here, and to everyone else. So we've got about 20 minutes for any questions that you might have, and then also, again, we'll be available to continue the discussion if you'd like. I just want to highlight, Mr. Hunter talked about the building, the teams there. I will tell you one way to build teams, cohesive teams, is through really good training. And that's an essential element here of what we're collectively focused on as well. So I'll stop there to see if there are any questions. Yep.
Thank you, sir. When it comes to intervention and the early prevention for domestic abuse, we see a lot of times that local units have policies for cool-down rooms, but this is not something that we programize across the Army. So when they're restricted to staying in their home and there is that incident, how do they find a way to get out of there before a problem occurs? So how do we get them a room, a space that they can be separated maybe from their family before an incident, instead of forcing them to stay in that home because we won't provide them a barracks room because we already pay for government housing?
Yeah, as you know, I mean, when these harmful behaviors happen, the key task is to intervene, to stop, and then to get people into the right places and the right venues in which they can seek help. We can hold people accountable, and then we can develop a good strategy or a way forward, dependent on the individual case and circumstances and then context there. It's a really powerful question. What I'd like to do is talk about that in the context of a system on our installations, right? So the system that Ms. Major, Mr. Hunter, Command Sergeant Major Martinez talked about relies on a whole of community, whole of enterprise approach to reducing those harmful behaviors, to intervening and then responding, right? So let's talk about suicide. Suicidal ideation is just one example of the system, and then I'll go back to you. So the research indicates that a suicidal ideation is an individual that has encountered a set of life circumstances that they don't know how to overcome. It seems insurmountable to them as an individual. And as they encounter that, then what they're saying is, hey, I need some help. Our response from kind of a system approach in the context of a community many times is, okay, well, let's send that individual to behavioral health, which we should do, right? So that they can leverage that and then use and then, really kind of immerse and receive help through that venue. But they very well might need to go to the chaplain. They may need to go to domestic violence, relationship counseling as another example. They may need to go get financial counseling, right? And so if you consider that problem against the context of a system, one thing that we're naturally doing is overloading one part of the system, the behavioral health, and then possibly underutilizing the remainder of the environment to help solve or reduce that specific behavior. So the goal is to correctly align resources with problems and then problems with resources from a whole of system, whole of community approach, right? So in that case, there's the separation. Again, there's the alignment there in support of, but then there's a whole of community intervention and response that's not kind of singularly focused on one aspect, but holistically focused on kind of including the whole community in support of. So thank you. Go ahead. Yes, sir. Yeah. A former People First Task Force member, by the way. So this is a little bit terrifying.
No, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Steve Lewis with Leidos. So, one of the things is obviously in prevention, it's that early sensing and knowing when people might be at risk. And are there concerns as DHA now is fully overseeing all healthcare delivery, and they're more of a fourth estate agency, collecting information about soldiers and not necessarily nested within the People's First strategy, if you will. Is there a concern about that?
Yeah, I mean, the essential task here, right, is enabling kind of a common operating picture or shared understanding in support of our efforts here. A large part of that is data, kind of getting data and information to share, understanding what we need. How do we build that common operating picture in support of our leaders here? And collaborating and working together is an essential part of the strategy, that information sharing and all of those things going on. Understanding as well. When you look across the force here, we do a number of surveys that we get feedback on, and one response is, hey, we need to do more pulse surveys. My own thought is we do tens of thousands of pulse surveys every day. When a sergeant looks their soldiers in the eyes and says, hey, how are you doing? This is the plan for the day, right? We're going to conduct these things. Are you feeling okay? So there's a tremendous amount of understanding and depth at every echelon, and I agree. The essential task is connecting that and then understanding and continuing to collaborate together. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Captain Darren, Army Reservist.
You can sit down,
16
please.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah, sir. But so I have drill this weekend, and I'll have suicide training. Last month, I had transgender training. I also go through sexual assault training. I do the master resiliency training, and I do the climate surveys, which for like 20 minutes ask me if I've ever been touched or sexually harassed. Besides the loss of training time, has like Big Army looked at any of the other effects of exposing soldiers to just negative material constantly, and any other adverse effects from that?
Yeah, I'm actually going to ask Ms. Major to answer because she's got a wonderful the goal is to move away from many of these PowerPoint presentations that we have and to engage in more meaningful, substantive, deep dialogues with each other in which we hold ourselves accountable for kind of where we are emotionally and from a vulnerability standpoint, and then to build a shared sense of purpose. If you go back to that golden triangle, that connection is fundamentally what is most important. It's hard to build that, lacking those deep, meaningful conversations and connections. And I'm going to ask Ms. Major to talk about kind of that movement away from some of those other kinds of things. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So that was a big part of why I put in, I briefly talked about the fact that training and awareness alone isn't enough to change behavior. We really need to be focusing on the underlying conditions and the environments that contribute to harm. I'm not aware of any research specifically on the continued exposure to perhaps these training events that may have some negative thoughts to it. But what we envision is a situation where we're not doing the annual training in the same way, right? 1 hour of suicide prevention training, 1 hour of SHARP training, 1 hour of domestic violence training or whatever it may be, because we know that it's not effective. But what it does is it gives every commander an opportunity to say, yes, I met this requirement, and here's my sign-in roster. And so we're really trying to change the problem, right? Change how we see the problem. And so not thinking of the problem as a harmful behavior that exists, but start to think about the problem as, how do I improve those conditions in the environment in which we all live, work, and play. I believe that there will always be a need for some forms of training, right? Like, for example, the assist training is more than likely going to remain a requirement at some point, because there is some intervention and response things that still need to happen. And how we intervene and respond often can be very specific to the harmful behavior that we're intervening and responding to. So I know this may not be answering your question in the sense of what research might be out there. We have some other folks in the room who may be able to answer that question afterwards specifically for you. But our goal is to do less training and focus more on the things that we talked about, those factors that actually can have a real impact on reducing harmful behaviors. And I hope that helps answer your question. Okay.
Okay. We're here. I hope you recognize how hard this is, right? This is a really complex problem. These are human endeavors here. It's a really wonderful, tough, difficult journey, and we rely on all of you, the whole team. And we would welcome further discussion, further engagement, further interaction. We can't thank you enough for being here today. But again, this idea of building cohesive teams that are highly trained, disciplined, and fit, that team is essential. This work that you're all doing is essential, and we can't thank you enough. So I'll see if there's any more questions. Oh, another one. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Since you transitioned to suicidal ideation and prevention, we have an issue that when you talk about in a societal context, in modern times with social media, if there's an individual who is showing signs of distress and needs intervention, the only way to maybe identify the location of that soldier is to request a titled law enforcement agent to send an unmasking request to the social media platform. This past year, the Army stopped having the 24/7 CID line, and so now it becomes a problem of how do we stay up to date in the social media age so we have resources to intervene in those late stages?
Yep, that's a really powerful question. As you know, we are modernizing as an output of the Fort Hood report, CID. CID has an incredible amount, and I would recommend if you have some time to follow up through CID. They have an incredible amount of resources to include, we were talking some of the analytics, data, and then some really powerful tools to assist with that problem exactly. But a key part of what they're doing is also those connections. If you go back to that whole of community approach here, the idea of a system, that includes the local community. And a big focus for Director Ford and then CID is building those relationships with local law enforcement and then working through those agreements before we have an incident, so that when we do, they can very quickly respond to that, reduce that, understand, locate, and then respond. So all of those things are going on. It's a really wonderful question here, and it is a part, that one specific response, understanding, et cetera, of a larger whole approach here. The whole of community, the local community, on the installation. Are there good, healthy outlets? Is there good quality of life? Do we have the right conditions around our soldiers so that we've created communities in which leaders, soldiers, and families and civilians can thrive? All of those things contextually, that specific response in response to that, what you described, is nested as part of kind of a larger whole, the backdrop of a whole of community, whole of enterprise effort. Thank you. Okay, we've got time. Okay, thank you very, very much. I'll ask Sergeant Major Martinez for final comments here this morning. Please, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. There is a tremendous amount of work going on in this space. We're nearly done with the Fort Hood IRC, Army Campaign Plan, Army People Strategy, Implementation Plan, Prevention Strategy, Cohesion Assessment Team, Fusion Directorate. There's a lot of tremendous, really substantive, thoughtful, whole of enterprise work going on here. We are really proud to be a part of it. As you know, there's a tremendous amount of work still to do. These kinds of journeys rely on all of us working together, and we're very proud to be part of this team with you. So I'll turn it over to Sergeant Major.
Thank you, sir. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your time. As you can probably imagine, the boss has mentioned, this has been challenging to come up with, and we spent a lot of time doing it, but we also acknowledge that we probably missed something on that. So in that, we ask that you challenge us to make sure that we've considered everything as we take care of people. And I have to be honest with you, like, I am truly impressed with the Army's interest and the time they've taken in this space, and the space being people. So I ask that you just challenge us with your questions so that we can make sure that we get this right for the Army. Thank you.